Forest Ranger Marcus Hoffman never imagined that freezing October morning of 2014 would completely change his perception of the unsolved mysteries of World War II. Walking through the dense forests of the Bavarian Alps, a region that for decades remained largely unexplored due to the deep scars left by the world conflict, Marcus was following his patrol routine when he noticed something peculiar among the intertwined roots of a centuries-old oak tree. An artificial structure, almost completely swallowed by vegetation, emerged discreetly from the soil covered by decades of decomposed leaves and thick moss. Cautiously approaching what appeared to be a camouflaged entrance, Marcus discovered an underground shelter built with military techniques characteristic of the 40s. The wooden planks, although deteriorated by time, still retain traces of the olive-green paint used by the German armed forces during the war. The access was partially obstructed by branches and debris accumulated over 7 decades, but it was clearly possible to distinguish that this was no ordinary bunker. There was something different about that construction, something that immediately aroused the professional curiosity of the experienced ranger, who had already found several abandoned war remains in the region. Illuminating the interior with his high-powered flashlight, Marcus came across a scene that left him completely astonished. In the center of the shelter, carefully arranged on a makeshift table with military crates, was a field medical kit in surprisingly good condition. The brown leather briefcase was engraved in faded gold letters with the name Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, Army Medical Corps. Next to the kit, military documents wrapped in waxed fabric had been waiting for 70 years to be discovered. The environment was impregnated with a heavy silence, as if time had stopped in that specific place, preserving secrets that someone had deliberately hidden from the authorities. Marcus Hoffman's discovery quickly caught the attention of local authorities and, later, historians specializing in World War II conflicts. Professor Heinrich Müller, a renowned researcher at the University of Munich and an expert on unsolved cases from the Nazi period, was summoned to examine the findings. According to Müller, that medical kit belonged to one of the few women who officially served as combat medics in the German army during the final years of the war. Elizabeth Weiss was not just an ordinary doctor, the professor explained during the first analysis of the documents found. She was part of a top-secret experimental unit, responsible for medical operations in occupied territories and high-risk missions. Official records about Dr. Elizabeth Weiss were scarce and contradictory. According to the military archives preserved in Berlin, she had mysteriously disappeared in December of 1944 during a classified mission in the Alps. His family never received official confirmation of his death, and his name has remained on a list of soldiers missing in action to this day. The kit found by Marcus, however, contained elements that suggested a much more complex and disturbing story than the official documents indicated. Among the perfectly preserved surgical instruments were handwritten notes in code, photographs of wounded soldiers, and a personal diary that would reveal in the coming weeks shocking details about Elizabeth Weiss's last days and the real reasons behind her disappearance in the Bavarian forest. The first investigations into the identity of Dr. Elizabeth Weiss revealed an extraordinary woman who defied all the conventions of her time. Born in Heidelberg in the year 1916, the daughter of a renowned surgeon and a professor of literature, Elizabeth demonstrated from an early age an exceptional intelligence and an iron determination that would lead her to break down seemingly insurmountable social barriers. At the age of 22, she became one of the first women to graduate from the University of Berlin with a degree in medicine, specializing in trauma surgery and emergency medicine. Her professors described her as a brilliant student, capable of performing complex procedures under extreme pressure, qualities that would later catch the attention of military recruiters. Professor Müller discovered, through documents recently declassified by the German Federal Archives, that Elizabeth had been personally recruited by General Hans Weber in 1942 to join an experimental medical unit called the Special Sanitary Group. This unit, composed of only 12 highly qualified doctors, had as its official mission to provide medical care in highly complex operations on the front lines. However, confidential documents found in the kit revealed a much more sinister reality. The unit was also responsible for medical experiments on prisoners of war and for developing interrogation techniques that used medical expertise to maximize the extraction of information from captives. Among the carefully preserved papers in the shelter, The most disturbing item was Elizabeth's personal diary, written in elegant and precise handwriting that contrasted dramatically with the disturbing content of her notes. The front pages revealed a young female doctor, initially enthusiastic about the possibility of serving her country and saving lives in combat. "I can finally use my expertise to make a difference in this terrible war," she wrote in May 1942. However, as the pages progressed, the tone of his notes changed dramatically. Elizabeth began documenting questionable medical procedures performed under orders from above, describing in coldly accurate scientific detail experiments that violated all the ethical principles of medicine. The most shocking turn of events came when investigators discovered that Elizabeth had secretly begun sabotaging the operations of her own unit. Coded pages of the diary revealed that she had established contact with a French resistance network through a downed American pilot whose wounds she had treated in 1943. The pilot, identified only as JM in his notes, had been held prisoner at a secret medical facility in the Alps, where Elizabeth worked developing resuscitation techniques for prolonged interrogations. In his own words, "Meeting James changed everything I believed about honor and duty. I saw in his eyes the humanity we are losing in this insane war." The last diary entries, dated December of 1944, revealed that Elizabeth had carefully planned her own defection. She had stolen classified documents about Nazi medical experiments, including lists of prisoners used as guinea pigs and details about secret facilities scattered throughout the Alps. His intention was to deliver this information to the Allies through contacts of the French resistance. The final entry, apparently hastily written, read simply, "The plane will arrive tomorrow at dusk. James got coordinates to a safe location. If something goes wrong, I hid everything in the agreed place. May God forgive me for what I saw and for what I couldn't stop." This discovery completely transformed the understanding of Elizabeth's disappearance, suggesting that she had not died in combat, but had attempted a desperate escape that would involve a clandestine aircraft and military secrets that could have changed the course of the war. The search for the identity of the mysterious American pilot, referred to only as JM in Elizabeth's diary, led Professor Müller to a discovery that further complicated the enigma of the disappearance. Through meticulous research in the American military archives, deposited in the Pentagon database, it was possible to identify the man who had completely changed the destiny of the German doctor. 26-year-old James Mitchell was a fighter pilot in the US 8th Air Force, a veteran of 17 bombing missions over German territory. His plane, a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, had been shot down over the Bavarian Alps in August 1943 during an escort mission that went horribly wrong when German squadrons surprised the American formation. Official American records listed James Mitchell as missing in action, presumed dead after the downing of his aircraft. However, captured German documents revealed that he had survived the impact and had been captured by a Wehrmacht patrol 3 days after the crash. What the military files did not mention was Mitchell's specific fate after his capture. Through personal letters found in Elizabeth's kit, it was discovered that James had been transferred to a secret medical facility known only by the code name Edelweiss, located somewhere remote in the Alps, where German doctors performed resuscitation experiments on prisoners who had suffered extreme trauma. The clandestine correspondence between Elizabeth and James, written in a mixture of German and rudimentary English, revealed the development of a deep relationship that transcended the barriers of war. James had taught Elizabeth some American medical techniques for treating severe burns, knowledge she used to ease the suffering of other prisoners subjected to the brutal experiments. In return, Elizabeth provided James with information about German operations and possible escape routes through the mountains. "You have shown me that there is still goodness in this world of horror," James wrote in a letter dated October 1944. "If we make it out of here alive, I promise I will tell the whole world about your courage." The most shocking discovery came when investigators found, among Elizabeth's personal belongings, a detailed map of the clandestine air routes used by the French resistance to evacuate important personnel. The map, drawn with Elizabeth's typical surgical precision, showed specific coordinates to a meeting point in the Alps, marked with the symbol of a red cross. Notes in the margin indicated precise times: 23 hours, light signal, 3 blinks. Experts in World War II clandestine operations confirmed that these instructions corresponded exactly to the protocols used by British Royal Air Force pilots for top-secret rescue missions in enemy territory. The puzzle began to form when Professor Muller discovered classified RAF flight logs, declassified only in 2010, which mentioned an operation called Nightingale, scheduled for the night of the 15th of December in the year 1944. The mission involved the rescue of 2 high-value targets on German territory, using a Westland Lysander aircraft modified for special night operations. The pilot assigned to the mission was squadron leader Robert Hayes, a veteran of 15 successful clandestine operations in occupied France. However, records indicated that the aircraft never returned to base, being officially listed as lost in action. The coincidence of the dates, the 15th of December of 1944, exactly when Elizabeth made her last entry in the diary, could not be ignored. Apparently, the plane that was supposed to rescue Elizabeth and James had disappeared on the same night that she was planning her desperate escape, creating a double mystery that had remained hidden for 7 decades in the icy mountains of the Bavarian Alps. The discovery of Operation Nightingale prompted a systematic search expedition led by military archaeology expert Thomas Brennan, a veteran of locating aircraft lost during world conflicts. Using the coordinates found on Elizabeth's map and cross-referencing them with historical weather data from December 1944, Brennan's team focused their search on a specific area of the Alps, approximately 15 kilometers north of the shelter where the medical kit had been discovered. The region, characterized by deep canyons and dense vegetation that grew uncontrollably during decades of neglect, presented ideal conditions to hide the wreckage of a small aircraft like the Westland Lysander. After 3 weeks of intensive searches using state-of-the-art metal detectors and ground-based sonars, the team finally located metallic signals consistent with military aircraft wreckage in a ravine hidden by a waterfall that had likely changed its course over the years. The first fragments recovered immediately confirmed the suspicions. Pieces of fuselage painted in the characteristic colors of the Royal Air Force, parts of the Bristol Mercury engine that equipped the Lysanders, and fragments of armored glass typical of aircraft used in clandestine missions. The state of conservation of the wreck was surprisingly good, protected from deterioration by the mountain's icy water and the thick layer of sediment that had accumulated over 7 decades. The most telling find came when the diggers discovered the section of the cockpit where the pilot and passengers were positioned during the flight. There, partially preserved by the constant cold of the region, was found the body of squadron leader Robert Hayes, still wearing his RAF flight uniform with the characteristic insignia of special operations. Personal documents found in his pockets, protected by a treated leather wallet, definitively confirmed his identity and the top-secret nature of his mission. Among her belongings was a map identical to the one found in Elizabeth's kit, with the same coordinates marked, and a portable radio tuned to the frequency used by the French resistance to coordinate rescue operations. The forensic analysis conducted by the team from the University of Munich revealed crucial details about the circumstances of the accident. The plane had crashed into a rocky ledge during a particularly severe snowstorm, as indicated by weather records at the time. However, the position of the wreckage and analysis of the structural damage suggested that Hayes had attempted a controlled crash landing, probably after some sort of mechanical failure or damage caused by German anti-aircraft fire. The navigation instruments found in the cockpit were set to the rendezvous point marked on Elizabeth's map, confirming that the pilot had exactly followed the plan set out for the rescue operation. The most disturbing finding, however, was the complete absence of any trace of the alleged passengers the plane was supposed to rescue. The Lysander's cockpit had the capacity to carry 2 passengers in addition to the pilot, but no additional bodies, personal luggage, or any evidence that Elizabeth and James were on board the aircraft at the time of the crash were found. This realization raised fundamental questions about what really happened on that fateful night in December 1944. Would Elizabeth and James have arrived at the meeting point? Would the plane have landed successfully before colliding? Or did some unforeseen circumstance prevent the rescue from being completed? The silent wreckage of the Lysander held only part of the truth, while the mystery about the final whereabouts of Elizabeth Weiss and James Mitchell deepened further, suggesting that additional dramatic events had taken place on that freezing night that would forever change the fate of 3. war-intertwined lives. The investigation into Elizabeth and James's whereabouts led Professor Mueller's team back to the original coordinates marked on the maps found on both the medical kit and the wreckage of the plane. The indicated location was situated on a relatively flat plateau in the Alps, strategically positioned to allow for a safe night landing, but sufficiently isolated to avoid detection by German patrols traveling through the region. For decades, that area had remained largely untouched, turning into an alpine meadow covered in wildflowers in the summer and deep snow in the winter. However, when the team of archaeologists began systematically excavating the site, they discovered unambiguous evidence that a military operation had indeed taken place there on that fateful December night in 1944. The first finds were subtle, but revealing for experts trained in locating traces of war activity. Fragments of twisted metal scattered in a specific pattern indicated that an aircraft had indeed landed at the site, leaving characteristic landing gear marks on the frozen earth. Metal detectors revealed the presence of empty ammunition shells of both German and American calibers, suggesting that some kind of armed confrontation had occurred after the rescue aircraft landed. The distribution of the shells indicated an intense but brief battle concentrated in a relatively small area near what would have been the Lysander's makeshift landing zone. The most significant discovery came when archaeologists found, buried under half a meter of sediment accumulated over 7 decades, a German military metal case containing documents that would shed new light on the events of that night. The papers, protected from decay by a near-perfect airtight seal, revealed operational orders dated December 14, 1944, addressed to Hauptmann Klaus Fischer, commander of a special security unit responsible for capturing deserters and spies. The orders were explicit. Dr. Elizabeth Weiss must be captured alive. The American prisoner is expendable. Operation authorized by the High Command. Use all the necessary resources. The documents revealed that the German High Command had discovered Elizabeth's escape plans through an interception of communications from the French resistance. The betrayal had been orchestrated by General Hans Weber himself, the same officer who had recruited Elizabeth into the Special Sanitary Group 2 years earlier. Weber had become a suspect in Elizabeth's activities after several prominent prisoners had died unexpectedly during interrogations whenever she was on medical duty. An internal investigation revealed that Elizabeth was administering lethal doses of morphine to spare prisoners from prolonged torture, an act that was interpreted as deliberate sabotage of German intelligence operations. The most shocking document found in the case was a detailed report of the capture operation itself, written by Hauptmann Fischer after the events. According to the report, an ambush had been carefully prepared at the rendezvous point, with German soldiers strategically positioned around the landing area. Elizabeth and James had arrived at the scene punctually at 22:30 p.m., carrying 2 backpacks with classified documents stolen from the Edelweiss facility. The rescue plane had landed as planned, but just as Elizabeth and James approached the aircraft, the German soldiers opened fire. Pilot Hayes, noticing the ambush, attempted to take off immediately to avoid capture, but his aircraft was hit by rifle fire that damaged the engine. In the confusion of the battle, Elizabeth and James managed to escape into the woods, but not before James was seriously wounded by a gunshot wound to the shoulder. The report ended on an ominous note. The fugitives have temporarily escaped, but the siege is being closed. Captures expected in the next 24 hours. This discovery completely revolutionized the understanding of Elizabeth's disappearance, revealing that she and James had survived the initial ambush, but still faced a relentless hunt in the icy mountains, where every hour that passed drastically reduced their chances of survival. The revelation about the ambush at the rendezvous point radically transformed the focus of the investigation, directing efforts to a much wider area of the alpine forest where Elizabeth and James would have tried to escape German forces. The military historian specializing in search and capture operations, Dr. Andreas Hoffmann, was summoned to analyze the tactics that would have been employed by Hauptmann Fischer during the hunt. Hoffmann explained that German special units were trained specifically for operations in mountainous terrain during the winter, using sniffer dogs, flares, and siege techniques that made escape extremely difficult for targets not trained in military survival. Elizabeth and James were at a clear disadvantage, Hoffmann noted. She was a doctor, not a combat soldier, and James was wounded and in completely uncharted territory. Analysis of topographic maps of the region cross-referenced with weather reports from December 1944, revealed that the escapees faced devastating conditions during their escape attempt. The temperature on that particular night had dropped to -16 degrees, with winds of up to 50 miles per hour and snow falling continuously. Mountain survival experts calculated that, under existing conditions, people without proper equipment and with untreated injuries would have a maximum of 12 to 18 hours before succumbing to hypothermia. This cold analysis of physical reality made any evidence that Elizabeth and James had managed to survive longer in the hostile nature all the more impressive. The first clue about the escape route was discovered when one of the members of the search team found in a natural cave approximately 2 kilometers southeast of the meeting point fragments of tissue that later analysis identified as being from the German medical uniform worn by Elizabeth. Along with the fabrics, improvised bandages made with strips of cloth were found, stained with blood that DNA analysis would later confirm belonged to 2 different individuals. The cave had clearly served as a temporary shelter, where Elizabeth used her medical expertise to treat James's wound before they continued their desperate escape across the snow-capped mountains. The most telling find at this stage of the investigation was the discovery of a trail of preserved footprints in a protected section of a permanent glacier located about 3 miles from the cave where they had initially taken shelter. The footprints, preserved by ice for 7 decades, clearly showed 2 pairs, one of standard German military boots, corresponding to the footwear worn by Elizabeth, and another of American flight boots, typical of 8th Air Force pilots like James. The pattern of the footprints revealed a slow and irregular progression, with one of the tracks showing clear signs of lameness, confirming that James was still injured when they passed that spot. More significantly, the footprints followed a specific direction, consistently pointing northeast toward the Swiss border. The discovery of the footprints directed to Switzerland was a moment of revelation for the entire investigative team. During World War II, Switzerland maintained its neutrality and served as a refuge for deserters, refugees, and people persecuted by totalitarian regimes. The Swiss border was approximately 40 kilometers from the position where the footprints were found, a distance that, under normal conditions, could be covered in 2 or 3 days of walking. However, considering the extremely difficult mountainous terrain, the brutal December weather conditions, James's wounding, and the likely German pursuit, the journey posed an almost impossible challenge. Professor Mueller commented, "If Elizabeth and James really tried to reach Switzerland in those conditions, they showed extraordinary courage and determination. But it also raises the crucial question, did they manage to complete this impossible journey, or did they perish in the attempt?" The direction of the footprints towards the Swiss border created a new dimension to the mystery, suggesting that perhaps Elizabeth Weiss's story did not end in the icy mountains of the German Alps, but possibly continued beyond the borders of the Reich into a territory where they could have found the freedom they desperately sought. The discovery of the footprints directed at the Swiss border prompted an unprecedented international collaboration between German and Swiss historians to investigate records of refugees from World War II. Dr. Marina Weber, an expert in Swiss neutrality archives at the University of Geneva, was contacted to examine classified documents on people who crossed the border illegally during the final months of 1944. The Swiss archives, kept in strict secrecy for decades due to the political sensitivities of the post-war period, contained detailed records of all refugees, deserters, and fugitives who sought asylum in neutral territory during the world conflict. The search for Elizabeth Weiss and James Mitchell in these archives would reveal information that would completely transform the understanding of their fates. Early research results in the Swiss archives were discouraging. There were no official records of Elizabeth Weiss or James Mitchell among the refugees processed at official border stations during December 1944 or the subsequent months. However, Dr. Weber explained that many people crossed the border completely clandestinely, avoiding official checkpoints and seeking refuge in remote Swiss mountain communities, where locals often offered temporary shelter before reporting the fugitives to the authorities. These unofficial cases were documented in a fragmentary way, often only in local police reports or in parish priest notes from small alpine villages. The turning point came when Dr. Weber discovered, in the archives of the tiny village of Bergdorf, located only 5 miles from the German border, a police report dated December 19, 1944. The document, written in Swiss German by Sergeant Hans Zimmermann, described the arrival of 2 German refugees in an extreme state of exhaustion and hypothermia, who had been found by local shepherds in an abandoned hut in the mountains. The report specifically mentioned a young woman with medical knowledge who spoke German with a polite accent, and an injured man who spoke English and claimed to be an American military pilot. The 2 had been secretly taken to the home of the local doctor, Dr. Ernst Kaufmann, who treated them for several weeks before officially reporting his presence to the Swiss authorities. The most revealing document was found in Dr. Kaufmann's personal archives, donated to the university by his family in 1990. Among his medical notes was a detailed record of the treatment of 2 patients who arrived in critical condition at the end of December in the year 1944. The woman had severe signs of frostbite on her fingers and toes, but she demonstrated exceptional medical knowledge, helping in the treatment of her partner, Kaufmann wrote. The American man had lost a lot of blood due to a gunshot wound to his left shoulder, as well as severe pneumonia. Both spoke of Nazi medical experiments and important documents they had hidden before crossing the border. This last observation was particularly significant, suggesting that Elizabeth had hidden the stolen documents somewhere between the German and Swiss border. Kaufmann's notes revealed that Elizabeth and James remained in Bergdorf for approximately 6 weeks, slowly recovering from their injuries and extreme exposure to the cold. During this time, Elizabeth worked informally as a medical assistant at the local clinic, impressing Kaufmann with her advanced knowledge of war trauma treatment. James, in turn, helped maintain the village's mechanical equipment, utilizing his technical skills developed as a military pilot. However, in February 1945, they both suddenly disappeared from Bergdorf, leaving only a note of thanks and a promise that they would return after the war ended. Kaufmann wrote in his last note about them, "They left during the night, without saying where they were going. The woman handed me a map with coordinates marked, saying that important documents were hidden in that place and that I should give them to the Allies if she did not return. I kept the map carefully, waiting for his return." This discovery not only confirmed that Elizabeth and James had survived the desperate crossing of the mountains, but also revealed that they had hidden the stolen documents somewhere specific, creating a new layer in the mystery that would continue to develop decades after their passage through neutral Switzerland. The map left by Elizabeth with Dr. Kaufmann remained in her personal archives for 7 decades, considered by the family only as a historical curiosity of no particular importance. However, when Kaufmann's granddaughter, attorney Maria Kaufmann-Schneider, learned about the ongoing international investigation, she immediately contacted Dr. Weber to hand over the document that her grandfather had carefully preserved. The map, drawn with Elizabeth's characteristic precision, showed specific coordinates for a location in the German-Swiss border region, marked with medical symbols and coded annotations that suggested the vital importance of what was hidden at that point. The coordinates pointed to a rocky area in the mountains, approximately 15 kilometers south of the village of Bergdorf, in technically German territory, but so close to the border that it would be virtually impossible for German authorities to monitor constantly. The expedition to locate the cache of documents was organized as an official archaeological operation with special permission from the German and Swiss authorities due to the potential historical importance of the find. Professor Müller led a multidisciplinary team that included archaeologists, military historians, and experts in World War II documents. The location indicated on the map turned out to be a natural rock formation with several deep fissures, ideal for hiding small objects so that they could withstand the elements for decades. Using metal detectors and endoscopic cameras to examine the cavities in the rock, the team finally located, in a crevice protected by carefully placed stones, an airtight metal container of German military origin. The contents of the container exceeded all expectations and confirmed the worst fears about the secret activities of the Special Sanitary Group. The documents, preserved in perfect condition by the airtight seal, included detailed reports on medical experiments performed on Allied prisoners of war and captured civilians, with detailed descriptions of procedures that violated all international conventions on prisoner treatment. Elizabeth had systematically documented every atrocity she witnessed, creating a comprehensive record that included names of doctors responsible, specific dates, location of secret facilities, and even clandestine photographs of the laboratories where the experiments were conducted. The documents revealed that the Edelweiss facility was only one of a dozen similar facilities scattered throughout German-occupied territories. Among the most disturbing documents was a detailed report on resuscitation experiments conducted specifically on captured Allied pilots, including techniques for reviving people after prolonged cardiac arrests aimed at prolonging interrogations. James Mitchell had undergone these procedures on multiple occasions, as documented in medical reports that Elizabeth secretly copied. The documents also included correspondence between General Weber and SS doctors, discussing the potential military application of the techniques developed and plans to expand the experiments to other prison camps. Elizabeth had noted on several pages personal comments couched in a simple code, revealing her growing horror and determination to expose these activities to the world. The most shocking find was a complete list of names, including doctors, military officers, and scientists involved in the experiments, many of whom had escaped trial after the war and were living under false identities in various countries. The list also included names of victims, with details about their destinations and the location of possible clandestine graves. Elizabeth had created a systematic file that could have significantly altered the Nuremberg trials if it had reached the hands of the Allies in time. The discovery of these documents 70 years later raised profound questions about how many war criminals had escaped justice and about the ultimate fate of Elizabeth herself. Professor Müller noted, Elizabeth Weiss risked everything to preserve evidence of these crimes against humanity. She knew that possessing these documents meant a death sentence if she was captured. The question that remains is, why did she never return to retrieve them after the war? The discovery of the documents not only completely validated Elizabeth's version of the atrocities she witnessed, but also created a new mystery as to why she had apparently abandoned such crucial evidence in her secret mountain hideout, suggesting that something had permanently prevented her return to that place where she had deposited the evidence of the horrors she had witnessed during her career as a military doctor. The discovery of the hidden documents intensified the search for Elizabeth and James's final whereabouts after their mysterious departure from Bergdorf in February 1945. The investigation expanded to archives from the post-war period, when millions of displaced people roamed devastated Europe, many assuming false identities to escape persecution or start new lives away from the horrors they had witnessed. The historian specializing in post-war refugees, Dr. Franz Kellner, was summoned to examine records of displaced persons camps, international aid organizations, and immigration documents from several countries that had received European refugees between 1945 and 1950. The first significant clue emerged from the archives of the International Red Cross, which kept detailed records of people searching for family members who had disappeared during and after the war. In March 1945, just a month after Elizabeth and James left Bergdorf, a woman identified as E. Werner had registered at the Red Cross station in Zurich, seeking information about German family members missing during Allied bombing raids. The physical description exactly matched Elizabeth Weiss, and the fake name kept her real initials, a common practice among people who adopted temporary identities. Even more telling was the fact that E. Werner had been accompanied by an American man identified only as J.M., who claimed to have lost his military documents during an aviation accident. Red Cross records revealed that Elizabeth, under the identity of E. Werner, had volunteered as a medical volunteer to assist in the treatment of refugees and liberated prisoners of war, who arrived at the Swiss reception camps in deplorable conditions. Supervisors at the organization described her as exceptionally competent in traumatology and emergency medicine, but noted that she avoided discussions about her past and showed obvious signs of severe psychological trauma. James, in turn, worked as a mechanic in the fields, using his technical skills to keep vehicles and equipment running. Witnesses of the time remember the couple as reserved people who maintained an evident emotional closeness, but who rarely socialized with other refugees or volunteers. The investigation took a dark turn when Dr. Kellner uncovered Zurich hospital records dating from June 1945, documenting the emergency admission of a woman identified as E. Werner due to severe nervous breakdown followed by attempted self-injury. The medical reports, signed by psychiatrist Dr. Heinrich Zorn, described a patient in a state of extreme psychological trauma who who presented with constant nightmares, episodes of panic, and an obsessive fixation on medical crimes she witnessed during the war. Zorn noted that the patient often spoke about hidden documents that could save lives and expressed deep guilt for not having done enough to stop the horrors. James visited daily, but doctors noticed that his own psychological condition was deteriorating rapidly due to the stress of caring for Elizabeth. The most disturbing hospital record revealed that Elizabeth had suffered a severe relapse in August 1945, just as news of the Nuremberg trials began to circulate widely. Confronted with reports of Nazi crimes being publicly exposed, Elizabeth apparently experienced a deep existential crisis, realizing that the evidence she had hidden could have contributed significantly to international justice. Dr. Zorn wrote, "The patient is convinced that she has failed in her moral duty by not immediately turning over the documents to the Allies. He constantly repeats that people died because I was a coward." Her mental state deteriorated to the point that she could no longer distinguish between reality and hallucinations. This was the last official record found about Elizabeth Weiss, or E. Werner, in the Swiss archives. James Mitchell simply disappeared from the records around the same time, leaving only a note at the hospital, stating that he would take care of her away from here. The discovery of these medical records revealed a completely new tragic dimension to Elizabeth's story, suggesting that the psychological weight of carrying secrets about war crimes had eventually destroyed her sanity, and that both she and James had disappeared again, this time fleeing not Nazi soldiers, but the devastating consequences of trauma that no medical treatment at the time could adequately heal. The disappearance of Elizabeth and James from the official Swiss records in August 1945 initiated a new investigative phase that extended far beyond European borders. Dr. Sarah Chen, a post-war immigration researcher at Columbia University, was contacted to examine entry records in the United States, Canada, Argentina, and Brazil, countries that received large numbers of European refugees during the Reconstruction period. The search for any trace of Elizabeth Werner or James Mitchell in immigration files would reveal startling clues about a desperate attempt to rebuild their lives on a continent far removed from the horrors they had witnessed in devastated Europe. The first clues emerged from the archives of New York Harbor, where September entry records of 1945 showed the arrival of a couple identified as Eric and Elena Weiss, third-class passengers on the refugee ship Liberty Star. The physical descriptions roughly matched James and Elizabeth, and the use of Elizabeth's real surname, combined with an Americanized male name for James, suggested an attempt to create identities that were simultaneously false and memorable to themselves. Immigration documents indicated that the couple had declared their intention to settle in the American Midwest, specifically in the state of Minnesota, where German immigrant communities could offer anonymity and acceptance without excessive questioning about their pasts. Investigation into the Minnesota State Archives revealed records of a corresponding couple who settled in the small town of New Ulm in October of 1945. Eric Weiss had found work as a mechanic in a local workshop, while Elena worked as a nurse in a rural hospital, using medical expertise that impressed colleagues with its sophistication, especially in trauma treatment. Neighbors at the time, interviewed decades later by local researchers interested in immigrant history, remember the couple as extremely private people who maintained an elaborate medicine garden and spoke German to each other when they thought no one was listening. They were respected in the community, but they never fully integrated, always maintaining an emotional distance that suggested deep secrets. The most telling discovery came through records from the local Lutheran church, where Pastor Wilhelm Enberg had kept detailed notes on members of his congregation. In his personal memoirs deposited in the church archives in 1980, Enberg wrote of Elena Weiss, "She came to confession regularly, carrying a deep guilt about things she witnessed during the war. It talked about doctors who had violated their oath and about their own failure to prevent suffering. He spent hours praying for the dead, mentioning names I had never heard. Eric supported her unconditionally, but I could tell that he also carried deep traumas from the war." The pastor documented that Elena had begun to work obsessively with wounded war veterans, as if trying to redeem herself by helping returning American soldiers with traumas similar to those she had witnessed in the German camps. Parish records revealed that the couple had lived in New Ulm for only 3 years, leaving suddenly in 1948 after Eleanor had suffered another nervous breakdown. Pastor Enberg noted, Elena discovered that one of the doctors mentioned in war crimes newspapers was living freely in Canada under an assumed name. The news completely devastated her. She screamed that she had failed again, that her silence allowed criminals to live in peace while their victims remained without justice. This was the last reliable reference to Elizabeth and James found in American records. Subsequent investigations at Minnesota registry offices, hospitals and cemeteries revealed no further information about his whereabouts. The couple had disappeared once again, seemingly unable to find peace even in the New World, haunted by the ghosts of a war that had officially ended but continued to ravage their minds through traumatic memories that no geographical distance could erase. Elizabeth Weiss's tragedy lay not only in the horrors she had witnessed, but in the impossibility of finding redemption or forgiveness for herself, condemned to a life of perpetual escape from moral responsibilities that she felt she had failed to fulfill during the most critical moments in human history. The investigation into the final whereabouts of Elizabeth and James after their departure from Minnesota in 1948 led researchers to explore records from remote regions where people traumatized by war often sought complete isolation from society. Anthropologist specializing in isolated communities, Dr. Michael Thornton, suggested examining the archives of religious missions, rural psychiatric hospitals, and self-sufficient farming communities that had proliferated in the American West during the post-war period. His theory was that Elizabeth and James, unable to find peace in civilization, would have sought refuge in places where they could live anonymously, away from any memory of the European horrors that constantly stalked them. The first significant clue emerged from the archives of Mission San Francisco, an isolated religious community in the mountains of Colorado that offered shelter to people traumatized by war, with no questions asked about their pasts. Records kept by Father Antonio Morales, the mission's founder, mentioned the arrival in April of 1949 of a German-American couple whom he identified only as the doctor and the nurse. The physical descriptions matched Elizabeth and James, and Morales noted that the woman demonstrated extraordinary medical knowledge but carried a deep sadness that seemed to consume her inside. The couple had volunteered to care for other mission residents suffering from war trauma, using advanced medical and psychological techniques for the time. Father Morales's diaries revealed surprising aspects of Elizabeth's personality during her years in the mission. She had established a kind of makeshift hospital where she treated veterans who arrived in a state of mental collapse, using methods that combined traditional medicine with occupational therapy techniques that she had developed intuitively. The doctor has a unique ability to understand the suffering of others, Morales wrote in 1950. She talks to patients about forgiveness and redemption, but I realize that she herself has never been able to forgive herself for something terrible that happened in her past. James worked in mission maintenance and had become a father figure to orphaned children living in the community, demonstrating a kindness that contrasted with the deep melancholy that characterized him. The most exciting twist in the investigation came when Morales mentioned that Elizabeth had secretly begun writing her memoirs in 1952, working obsessively through the nights to document everything she had witnessed during the war. She said that she needed to tell the truth before she died, that the world had a right to know about the horrors she witnessed, the priest noted. She wrote in German, English, and even medical Latin, creating a detailed account that she kept in a metal box hidden in her room. This discovery was revolutionary, as it suggested that Elizabeth had finally found the courage to publicly document her experiences, potentially creating invaluable historical testimony about Nazi medical crimes. Mission records indicated that Elizabeth and James had lived there for approximately 8 years, finally finding a measure of peace by helping other trauma survivors. However, in June 1957, they both left suddenly after Elizabeth received a letter that, according to Morales, left her in a state of absolute shock. The priest never knew the contents of the letter, but he noted that Elizabeth had spent 3 days in a row frantically writing in her memoirs before leaving. She handed me a sealed envelope, asking to send it to the International Court of Justice in The Hague in case something happened to her, Morales wrote. He said he finally had the courage to face his demons and that he would go where he should have gone a long time ago. Elizabeth and James's sudden departure from the mission, carrying with them both the manuscript of their memoirs and the mysterious envelope destined for the international authorities marked the beginning of the final phase of their lives, a journey that would take them back to the origins of the trauma that had dogged them for more than a decade, suggesting that Elizabeth had finally decided to confront directly the consequences of her actions during the war, regardless of the personal cost that this decision might entail for her and James. The investigation into the mysterious letter that had prompted Elizabeth's sudden departure from the San Francisco mission led researchers to the archives of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, where they discovered correspondence that would completely change the understanding about the final events of Elizabeth Weiss's life. By June 1957, the court had sent letters to several people identified as possible witnesses to Nazi war crimes, including one addressed to Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, last known location, New Ulm, Minnesota. The letter, which eventually found its way into Elizabeth's hands through a network of informants tracking European refugees, reported that General Hans Weber had been located living under a false identity in Argentina and would be extradited for trial for crimes committed during his leadership of the Special Sanitary Group. The specific contents of the letter revealed that international investigators had uncovered partial evidence about the activities of the Edelweiss facility through testimony from other survivors, but desperately needed Elizabeth's testimony to complete the case against Weber and other Nazi doctors still at large. The letter specifically mentioned that medical documents stolen from the facility, if they still exist, would be critical to securing convictions for crimes against humanity. This direct reference to the documents Elizabeth had hidden in the Alpine Mountains 12 years earlier confirmed that international authorities knew of their existence, but not of their precise location, making Elizabeth's testimony absolutely crucial to international justice. Elizabeth's decision to return to Europe was documented through passage records found in the archives of the Cunard Line, showing that she and James boarded the ship Queen Mary in New York City on July 10, 1957, using legitimate U.S. passports under the names Eric and Elena Weiss. During the Atlantic crossing, Elizabeth had written letters to Father Morales that were later found in his personal archives. In the letters, she revealed her determination to testify at Weber's trial, regardless of the personal consequences. "I finally have the opportunity to bring justice to the victims I was unable to save," she wrote. "James is by my side, as he always has been. We know that returning to Europe is dangerous, but I can't go on living with this guilt." Hotel records from Southampton, England, confirmed the couple's arrival in July 1957, but also revealed that they stayed only 3 days before leaving for the European continent. During this stay, Elizabeth had contacted British authorities involved in the war crimes trials, handing over copies of her memoirs written on the mission and providing detailed information about the location of the documents hidden in the Alps. British investigators would later confirm that Elizabeth's information was accurate and extremely valuable, allowing for the recovery of additional evidence that significantly strengthened the cases against multiple Nazi war criminals. The last documentary evidence about Elizabeth and James was discovered in the files of the German Munich police, dated the 25th of July of 1957. The police report documented the arrival of an American couple of German origin who had approached local authorities offering assistance in locating evidence of war crimes in the Bavarian Alps. The woman demonstrated detailed knowledge about secret military installations and specific locations where important documents had been hidden, said Chief Investigator Heinrich Bauer. She and her companion volunteered to lead an expedition into the mountains to retrieve evidence that could be crucial for pending trials. The report indicated that the expedition had been authorized and that Elizabeth and James set out as guides for a team of German and British investigators on July 28th, heading to the very region where, more than 60 years later, Ranger Marcus Hoffman would find the medical kit that began this whole investigation. The irony was profound. Elizabeth had finally returned to the Alps where her journey of escape had begun 13 years earlier, this time not as a fugitive, but as a courageous witness determined to ensure that justice was finally served for the crimes she had witnessed, closing a circle that connected her traumatic past with a last desperate attempt to find redemption through truth and accountability for the guilty. The final revelation about the fate of Elizabeth Weiss and James Mitchell came through the discovery of the personal files of investigator Heinrich Bauer, found in 1995 after his death and donated to the German Federal Archives by his family. Among his most sensitive documents was a detailed report on the July expedition of 1957 that had never been officially filed, apparently due to the sensitive nature of the events that took place during that final mission in the Alpine mountains. Bauer's report, written with the meticulous precision of a seasoned investigator, documented not only the successful recovery of the documents hidden by Elizabeth, but also the dramatic events that followed that would explain, finally, how Elizabeth's medical kit arrived at the shelter where it would be discovered 60 years later. According to Bauer's report, the initial expedition to the Alps had been a complete success. Elizabeth led the team directly to the hiding place in the rocks, where she had deposited the stolen documents in 1944, and the recovery of the evidence exceeded all the expectations of the investigators. The documents were in perfect condition and provided irrefutable evidence against General Weber and more than 40 other Nazi officers and doctors. Elizabeth had spent 3 full days explaining each document to investigators, providing historical context, and identifying people and locations mentioned in the reports. His memory was extraordinarily accurate, and his courage in confronting again the horrors he had documented deeply impressed all present. James remained constantly by her side, offering emotional support during the most difficult moments of the testimonies. The final tragedy began on the 4th day of the expedition, when the group decided to explore other areas of the mountains, where Elizabeth suspected that additional evidence might be hidden. During this expanded search, the team was surprised by a severe alpine storm that forced a division of the group to seek shelter. Elizabeth and James, accompanied by 2 German investigators, found refuge in the same underground shelter that Marcus Hoffmann would discover decades later. It was there, during the long hours of waiting for the weather to improve, that Elizabeth made the decision that would define her final legacy. She handed James her personal medical kit, along with a sealed letter, instructing him to hide both of them in the shelter in case something happened to her. Bauer's report revealed that Elizabeth had developed a serious heart condition during the years of post-traumatic stress, a condition she had carefully concealed from everyone, including James. During the 5th night on the mountain, as the storm continued, Elizabeth suffered a massive heart attack. Despite the desperate efforts of James and the 2 German investigators to save her, she died in James's arms, in the same shelter where she had found refuge 13 years earlier during her original escape. His last words, recorded by Bauer, were, "I have finally done what I should have done from the beginning. The victims will have justice." James, devastated by the loss, carried out Elizabeth's final instructions, hiding the medical kit and letter in the shelter before helping transport her body back to civilization. The letter, found along with the medical kit, preserved for 70 years, contained Elizabeth's final words addressed to future generations. "If you're reading this, it means that my story has finally come to an end in this place where it all began," she wrote. "I hope that my testimony has served to ensure that the crimes I witnessed are never forgotten and never repeated. I have dedicated my life to trying to repair the evil I could not prevent, but now I can finally rest, knowing that the truth has been told." The letter continued with detailed instructions for anyone who found the kit to contact international authorities and ensure that its history was preserved for posterity. James Mitchell lived to be 1989, always keeping secret about the location of the shelter, as he had promised Elizabeth. He spent his final years quietly working with human rights organizations, using the considerable fortune he had amassed as a businessman to fund war crimes research and support trauma survivors. General Weber and 36 other Nazi officers and doctors were convicted and executed on the basis of the evidence provided by Elizabeth, ensuring that their final courage was not in vain. His story, preserved in the medical kit hidden in the mountains for 7 decades, serves as an eternal testimony to the strength of the human spirit to seek justice and redemption, even in the face of the most unthinkable horrors. Elizabeth Weiss, the doctor who risked everything to expose the truth, finally found the peace she had been seeking all her life, knowing that her sacrifice contributed to a world where the memory of the victims would be honored and the perpetrators would be held accountable for their crimes against humanity. When Ranger Marcus Hoffmann found that deteriorated medical kit in 2014, he had no idea he was unearthing one of the most profound stories about moral courage of World War II. Elizabeth Weiss's journey teaches us that true strength lies not in blindly following orders, but in questioning the system when it becomes inhumane. She chose humanity over blind loyalty, love over hate, and justice over expediency. His medical kit, preserved for 70 years in the Alpine mountains, carried more than surgical instruments. It carried proof that an ordinary person can choose to make a difference, even when the whole world seems to have lost its mind. Elizabeth and James's story also shows us how war trauma can haunt people for entire decades, but also how true love and determination can overcome even the most devastating experiences. They fled together across icy mountains, survived in hostile territories, rebuilt their identities in distant countries, and finally found the courage to return and face their demons. Their relationship transcended nationalities, languages, and even the horrors of war, proving that genuine human connections can flourish even in the most arid soils in history. James dedicated his entire life to protecting Elizabeth's memory, guarding her secrets until the end, demonstrating that some promises are too sacred to be broken. What makes the discovery of the medical kit even more extraordinary is how it connects generations separated by 70 years through a common search for truth. Marcus Hoffman, Professor Mueller, Dr. Weber, and all the researchers involved in the research became, unknowingly, extensions of Elizabeth's original mission. They completed the work she had started, ensuring that her story was told and that the victims of Nazi experiments finally received the recognition they deserved. This chain of discoveries reminds us that history is never truly buried. It just waits for the right people to bring it to light at the right time. Elizabeth's transformation from Nazi doctor to heroine of international justice illustrates a fundamental truth about human nature. It is never too late to choose the right side of history. Even when we carry deep guilt, even when we feel that we have failed irreparably, there is always an opportunity for redemption through right action. Elizabeth spent years plagued by guilt, but she channeled that suffering into an iron determination to ensure justice was served. Her death in the same shelter where she had found refuge 13 years earlier represents not a tragedy, but a poetic conclusion. She had fulfilled her mission and finally found the peace she had sought for so long. Elizabeth Weiss's story challenges us to reflect on our own choices when faced with injustices in our lives. How many times do we remain silent when we should be speaking? How many times have we chosen convenience over courage? The medical kit found in the Alpine mountains is not just a historical artifact. It is a reminder that each of us has the power to choose between being complicit or being resistant, between perpetuating evil or fighting for justice. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think about courage, sacrifice, and redemption, share this reflection by liking the video and leaving a comment on how you would apply Elizabeth's lessons in your own life. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the hidden secrets of humanity and teach us that even in the darkest moments of history, there is always a light waiting to be discovered by those who have the courage to search for the truth.